Forum Borealis Paradigm Expansion.
Greetings from the north, and welcome to a special edition of the Forum, which is a promo for our shows, while we're waiting for a future program to address the subject of the mysteries of the poles in depth. Today you'll hear from Peter Levenda, Joseph Farrell, and Richard Dolan on the mystery of Antarctica, as well as the riddle of Rudolf Hess' capture in Scotland. This forum is but an amalgam of excerpts from our conversations with them called Rise of the Nazi Cult, Part 2, Secrets of the Third Reich, Part 2, and The Case for a Breakaway Civilization, Part 2. If you enjoy what you hear, check out these original interviews available at our site. The sound quality on some parts are unfortunately poor, but at least you can grasp the insights they share. And also rest assured that all our future programs will maintain a listening experience with at least the same quality as the last part of this forum. For details on the guests, their background, books, websites, etc., go to our website forumborealis.net and take it from there. Without any further ado, sit back and enjoy this journey into the odd, exotic and fascinating mystery of Antarctica and the riddle of Hess' capture. Isn't the real concept also tied to the hollow earth, inner earth concept?
Oh, sure. And it goes back also to War of the Worlds, the man who wrote the Time Machine, Wells.
Yes.
Wells also was thinking along the same idea. There was a hollow earth. There were people living underneath the earth. And, of course, the hollow earth was associated with Admiral Byrd, claiming that he had seen an opening in the Arctic Circle that led to a land of lushness of green trees and all the rest of it.
Yeah, but I'm getting to how this was connected to the Nazi. Wasn't it a part of the Nazi mythos?
Oh, sure. It was. The hollow earth was. The world ice theory was also one of those ideas that was embraced. But when we're talking about the Nazis in this context, I don't think Hitler per se was very much a part of this. This was Himmler.
Right.
And Himmler's hobby horse was occultism, esotericism, hermeticism, particularly in service to the state. So Himmler, as the head of the SS, financed many strange operations and strange research institutes like the Ahnenerbe and other groups that went around searching for archaeological artifacts, evidence that the Aryan race had been around the world, had conquered other countries outside of Europe. He believed that there was, that Tula may have been an underground civilization, similar to Shambhala, the Tibetan idea of there being, a hidden mysterious civilization below the earth or floating above the earth or in the ocean or something like that. So all of these ideas were swirling around Europe at the time, and a lot of people became fascinated by these concepts. Was there a civilization beneath the earth? Were we, for instance, actually underneath another surface? Were the stars, according to one theory promoted by Himmler, were the stars that we saw in the sky actually pinpoints breaks in a kind of surface material, through which light was shining?
Yes, because for many people, the hollow earth is, a huge lot to swallow in itself. But they had a reversed hollow earth theory, didn't they?
Yes.
That we actually live in the hollow earth.
Right. And so one of the experiments that Himmler was trying he conceived of, was that since we are in a hollow earth, according to Himmler, we should be able to bounce a radar signal off of the surface and then find, enemy warships on the other side of the world, because we could bounce a signal off of this supposed surface above us, since we're inside another sphere. We'll bounce the signal off of that sphere and detect warships in other parts of the world. I mean, he actually believed it to that extent that they ran these experiments. Rudolf Hess was Hitler's number 2 man. He was the number 2 man in Germany, his right-hand man, up until his flight to England in May of 1940. But prior to that, Hess was a man who had been born in Alexandria in Egypt. He had flirted with Freemasonry. He had studied occultism, astrology, Asian religions, all of these things. He was very close to Karl Haushofer, who was the man who invented some of the geopolitical platforms that we still read about today. The idea of geopolitics was something that Haushofer had contributed. Haushofer spent time in Asia. He was one of the people responsible for building an alliance between Germany and Japan at a time when Germany would have been better off building an alliance with China, according to the very strong pro-China lobby within the Nazi government. The Japanese side won, largely due to Haushofer's influence. But Haushofer was also a firm believer in astrology, a firm believer, as I say, in Asian religions. Therefore, he was in this liminal space sort of between Europe and Asia, where he would pretty much accept almost anything. And he influenced Hess a great deal. Hess was arrested with Hitler, of course, in 1923 during the beer hall putsch, the failed attempt to take over the government. He went to prison with Hitler, and he helped Hitler to write Mein Kampf. Hess was a very, very major player where Adolf Hitler was concerned, and the flight to England was considered, at least officially, a great betrayal of Hitler and Hitler's trust. And that's when he had the occultists and astrologers throughout Europe, throughout at least the occupied areas, arrested and thrown into prison. Himmler was very proud of this expedition, and there's a possibility there was another experiment that was conducted in Tibet, which goes back to our hollow earth theory. Mm-hmm. The idea being that maybe Tibet, being the highest point in the world on top of the Himalayas, mm-hmm. would have been an excellent place to test this hollow earth theory. So there was that, and a kind of a world ice theory thing.
Yeah, if we are inside the earth, it would be. But if we are outside the earth, it would be the worst kind of place.
The worst place, exactly.
Even though they do have myths of Shambhala and Agartha and all that.
Sure. Mm. So this is another thing that they were supposed to do. They were supposed to conduct these scientific experiments up there as well. Mm. So all of this was part of that Tibet expedition.
You did mention that Himmler was fond of issuing expeditions, sitting safe and sound in his German office and getting reports. Yep. And you mentioned looking for the Grail, retrieving the old Qatar's places. But one thing that's always fascinated me, and actually we'll have programs on this topic in the future, but you could probably also contribute to this, and that is the weird obsession they had with the poles. I remember one of the first books I read about it was Professor Jocelyn Goodwin's Arctos.
Yes.
What's your take on this? Antarctica and Arctis.
Yeah, it is an obsession, and it stems exactly from the belief that Thule Gesellschaft. The Thule is supposedly a kingdom in the ice in one of the poles, probably in the North Pole. I mean, there is a city, I believe, in Greenland called Ultima Thule.
Yeah.
So this is part of this mystique that there is a place which was a kind of Shangri-La or Shambhala below the earth at the poles that their race came from. That if you could go there, you would find, cities underground and all the rest of it, part of the hollow earth theory. And you could only access them, obviously, through the poles because they're so inaccessible to humans anyway. It makes the perfect hiding place for a secret civilization. And we know, for instance, that the Germans sent an expedition to the South Pole, to Antarctica, just before the war started. I think it was in 1938, if I'm not mistaken. They sent an Antarctic expedition, it might have been earlier, in order to find out what was going on down there. They planted swastika flags everywhere. They claimed Antarctica for the Third Reich.
Yes, and they did this on Norwegian territory with complete disregard for international law.
Of course. Why would they stop? Why would they start now?
Yeah. Well, this was before the invasion of Poland. Yeah. So you could argue this was the first actual invasion of any other country.
Yes, you could make that case. Yeah, the invasion of Antarctica.
It just dawned upon me. They actually invaded Norway first.
Yeah, there you go.
Queen Maud's land. But continue.
Yes, Queen Maud's land, exactly.
Yeah. Which they called New Swabia?
Neue Schwabenland. Yeah. So they called it Neue Schwabenland. And what is interesting about it is that the man who was in charge of that expedition, whose name I forget, but I believe it's in my book, Hitler Legacy, if I'm not mistaken, the man who was in charge of that expedition actually survived the war and became kind of part of the Nazi underground. although he was a scientist, he was involved in meteorology and those kinds of studies. He, for some reason, maintained contact with a lot of the old comrades after the war, a lot of whom had been scientists. We brought some over from Paperclip, for instance, of course, as everyone knows. He was not one of them, but he did survive the war. And then a funny thing happens. I think everyone who's listening to this may already be aware that directly after the end of the war, in a time of tremendous upheaval, economic collapse all over the place, everything is in chaos, the United States decides to send an expedition of their own to Antarctica, and it's known as Operation High Jump. At a tremendous expense, we send an enormous flotilla, a convoy of ships, thousands of men, all sorts of materiel, goes down to Antarctica supposedly to conduct scientific experiments. Like we needed to do this immediately. You know, we had just defeated Germany.
With bombers. And,
yes, with bombers.
All
yes.
kinds of weapons. Yeah.
What was the point of that? You know, we still don't know exactly because the reasons we're given are all very vague and ambiguous and don't make any sense. And the fact is they really didn't take any scientific instrumentation with them. So.
And it's still classified, isn't it?
It's still classified, sure.
So you were saying that they may have established bases there then already in 1938?
Well, it seems as though they did something there. It was the International Geophysical Year. Okay, that was the sensible occasion for the Nazis to go to Antarctica.
Alfred Richter? Could that be him?
Yeah, I think it might have been Richter, yes.
Okay.
I think so.
Yeah.
So this was their ostensible reason for going down there, the International Geophysical Year. But we had no reason to go during Operation High Jump. There was no particular reason for us to be down there, especially as the war in Japan had just ended. We were still involved with the occupation. We were still involved with, Japanese soldiers not knowing the war was over, still fighting. And yet, for some reason, we find it's convenient to send an entire navy down to Antarctica.
You mentioned this Richter or something.
I think.
Because if what you're saying is real, then he must be very important also for the post-war basis.
He survived, like I say, the war. I know this because I was in a privileged position to see an address book of a Nazi who died in Asia. And this, his name, his address, everything appears in this address book. And at that time, I believe he was living in South America. So he was one of the ones who, for some reason, found it necessary to escape.
But why would they go to Antarctica in the first place? What was their obsession with the poles? Was it just practical to have bases, or does this fit in with their philosophy somehow?
No, I believe it's their philosophy. One of the philosophies that they promoted highly in those days as a real scientific theory was the world ice theory, as they called it, invented by a man called Hans Horberger. The world ice theory said that the world goes through these periods of getting very cold, and there's ice ages and all the rest of it. But there's this idea that in Antarctica or in the poles in general, there is archaeological evidence of earlier civilizations. So this was part of the idea that the Nazis had. Remember, they were very interested in finding evidence of an Aryan civilization that was global.
Excuse me, was the Peary Rice map generally known at this point?
I don't know if it was known. I mean, I have a book almost within arm's reach, but I don't know if it was really known to the Nazis at that time, the Peary Rice map. That might have come. That sounds like a 1930s discovery, though, doesn't it? I mean, I'm trying to.
Yeah, after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Yeah, but it would make sense to look for an antediluvian civilization in the South Pole, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. And if people who believed the Hollow Earth stories, would have taken it for granted that there was an entranceway somewhere down there. Also, there was the idea constantly the Nazis had, Himmler had, and his people that, you could spy on the rest of the world from different parts of the world if, we truly live inside a hollow earth. All of these scientific theories got mixed up together. But I think that there was a belief as well among the Americans that certain high-ranking Nazi personnel, technology, weaponry made its way to Antarctica after the war by U-boat. And this was something that a lot of people took for granted. They believed this was possible. We know that U-boats were as far south as Argentina, Rio de la Plata, down South America towards Patagonia. And it's only a relatively short sail from the southern tip of South America to the northern tip of Antarctica. So there might have been a belief that somehow the Nazis, during that International Geophysical Year, that they had established a base in Neue Schwabenland, as they called it, and that they had, they planted Nazi flags, we know that, all over the place. They dropped them from airplanes and that sort of thing, claiming the land. And it's possible that people believed there was a Nazi base down there, that somehow the Nazis had found a way to build, a year-round a bunker in that part of the world as well. So we just don't know. We don't have the documents for high jump. Our expedition is a mystery. I still find it unbelievable that we would have done this at that point in time. And there's a persistent rumor about Nazis. And one of the persistent rumors, by the way, about Antarctica and the poles in general was promoted by a man called Ernst Zundel, who ran a publishing house in Canada, which was very revisionist. The Holocaust didn't happen, so on and so forth. He was arrested, actually, in Canada for doing that. But he published books insisting that there was a UFO base in that part of the world. And there was a Nazi UFO Antarctica connection, a connection between the Nazis and UFOs based in Antarctica. And the funny thing is, if you know Linda Moulton Howe, UFO researcher, a very famous researcher, had actually interviewed a man who worked for the Americans, I guess from the American Navy, had done overflights of Antarctica much later than Operation High Jump, but his reports seemed to indicate that there was a base down there of some kind, that there was something going on down there. It was weaponry that was being stored down there of some kind. There was some experiments taking place there, or there was an alien presence, something of that nature, which we had sent scientists down to Antarctica. They returned from their visit to the specific site, very deep in the continent, came back terrified, were debriefed, then scattered around the world so they couldn't tell their story to anyone. So this is one of the stories that Linda Moulton Howe's come up with, and she's generally pretty reliable when it comes to this type of information. So I'm interested to find out more about that. There could be a connection there which we can't even begin to speculate, that it has to do with off-world, matters and, Nazi UFO, research and that sort of thing.
This is a good point to pitch a future show. We'll have, like I mentioned briefly, we'll have an entire show on the Antarctica Nazi connection. And Peter has now already mentioned some of it. So you can look forward to that, people. It's an incredibly interesting topic. And I just see here that up until 1938, there was 1939 actually was the last, 3 German Antarctic expeditions, and at least the third one was so big that they could establish bases based on that. And obviously we know from later history that UFO sightings have been associated to the poles. There's been alleged crashes even up here on the north in Spitsbergen. And it's just it won't die, this modern myth about UFOs, Nazis and the poles. There's something there to be retrieved for sure. Why on earth did Hess, why would he in 1940 be so suicidal that he went to England? And, I guess his fate we should get back to in a post-war episode, but just why did he go there?
Well, in the first place, Haushofer told him it was a great astrological time for him to try to form an alliance between Nazi Germany and England. And the person he went to see was a known Nazi sympathizer, a member of the House of Lords who was a Nazi sympathizer. So he was flying deliberately to meet him and to see if he could...
But did he get guarantees that he wouldn't be captured?
No, well, this is what's fishy about this story. He's making this flight to England right around the time that Operation Barbarossa, which is the invasion of the Soviet Union by the Nazis and the breaking of the Stalin Pact, was being put into motion. So for some reason, Hess flies to England. Was it a diversion? Was there something else behind Hess's flight? It's always been kind of a mystery because it doesn't make a lot of sense. Hess went there. He went there to talk to the politicians in England to try to form a peace treaty. I mean, that's the cover story anyway that we have. And nobody talks to him. What happened? Winston Churchill refused to talk to him. Winston Churchill refused to the second most important man in Germany, Hitler's right-hand man, who flies into his country under cover of darkness, parachutes out and says, "Take me to your leader," basically. And Winston Churchill says, literally, his words were, I'm not going to deal with Hess. I want to watch the Marx Brothers.
Where would the world of quotes be if it wasn't for Churchill?
If it wasn't for Churchill. So he has the projector set up. He's watching the Marx Brothers. He doesn't want to hear about Hess. What does that mean? What was really going on? There's something else going on. Yeah. And of course, the post-war aspect of this is important as well. But when Hess was in captivity during the war, there was a rumor this wasn't really Hess. And the head of British intelligence and the head of American intelligence, Wild Bill Donovan at the time, all of these guys wondered whether or not, the Hess in captivity was really Hess. They were looking for scars. They were looking for certain things that would tell whether or not this guy was who he said he was. There was an idea that this was an imposter for some reason, and they kept an imposter.
Not a double.
A double.
Just an imposter.
No, well, a double. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Or an imposter. But basically a double. Hess's double. But then, if that's so, then what happened to the real Hess, which we haven't seen? So I don't know. There was a lot of mystification about the flight of Hess. There was a lot more to it, and we'll never know.
How did they capture him? Where did they capture him?
He flew. He was off slightly where his landing was concerned. His plane kind of crash landed. He got out of the plane, and a couple of farmers found him, and they brought him to the local constabulary, and that was the end of it.
It doesn't sound like a very professional diplomatic mission to me.
No, it was a very ignominious end to that diplomatic mission, yes.
I'm just taking this right out of the air, but is there any traces that Bormann could have been involved to outsmart him or fool him somehow to get in a better position himself?
Well, Bormann was known for that. Bormann was a real political animal. And whoever was between him and Hitler, he had to get rid of one way or the other. And that meant Himmler, that meant Ernst Kaltenbrunner, that meant von Ribbentrop. Everybody, had to get out of the way between himself and Hitler. So that's a possibility too. But there's another possibility, which, as I mentioned in Unholy Alliance, is the Nuremberg trial. At the Nuremberg trial, Hess gets up to make a speech. And he starts to talk about mind control in this speech.
Wow.
They cut him off immediately. They don't allow him to talk anymore. After only a couple of minutes of talking, they cut him off, and they say, "That's it, enough for you, forget it, no more." It's a tantalizing introduction. If you read his Nuremberg speech, it's very short because they didn't let him talk. But he's starting to talk about mind control and how, things are not what they seem, and then he's cut off, and that's the end of it.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah.
All of our files are free and will remain free. If you like the show, you can show support by donating $1 to help with expenses. Just use the PayPal link on our website, YouTube channel, or Facebook page. Thanks.
When I had Peter on the other day, he mentioned Richter, who was one of the leaders of one of the Nazi polar expeditions. I think it may have been in 38 or 39. Do you know if this is the same Richter? Could he be?
No, it's not. No,
okay.
No. Captain Richter was a different fellow altogether, and I've never been able to verify if there's any family relationship between the two.
Well, according to Levenda, this Richter survived the war.
Yes.
And if he was central to whatever shenanigans going on down in the pole, he should be an essential post-war Nazi.
Yeah, the trouble with the Nazi Antarctic expedition, there's a lot of, as you know, there's a lot of mythology out there about it. That to my mind is very, very questionable. I don't believe, as I said, I think in the first part of our interview, I don't think that Antarctica was some sort of secret Nazi UFO research base. The idea that they would have been able to construct something like that during the war, much less supply it with the relatively small German Navy is, to me, this is just outlandish. People aren't thinking that, keep repeating that mythology. That said, I don't think it's impossible that the Germans had something down there. They would have put weather stations down there to monitor weather for their U-boat and other naval activity. They probably had some sort of small submarine base down there, perhaps for resupply. But to construct a research center and build flying saucers and all that nonsense, no, I don't go there.
Yeah, no, I know, but I'll press you a little, since this is we can speculate a little at this part, and since we're at the topic, then why would they carpet bomb Antarctica with Nazi swastikas before even Operation Barbarossa?
Right.
Why would they have all these expeditions? What's their obsession with the South Pole? Just bases, some bigger plan? And didn't you mention, by the way, I think actually it was in an interview with Bite Show, that they hired Admiral Byrd to guide them?
No, they did contact Admiral Byrd. He went to Germany for a couple of months, as I recall, just to kind of brief them on the conditions and so on.
Oh, so he didn't go with them, though?
No, he did not go with them. No. He returned to the United States, I think, shortly before the outbreak of the war. That expedition, we need to remember, if I remember correctly, that expedition left Germany in late 1938. It returned to Germany, I think, sometime in April of 1939. It took, I have the map of how it went to Antarctica. On the way back, it took this very weird zigzagging course all the way, all over the Atlantic, as if they were trying to avoid any sort of contact with anybody. Now, the interesting thing about this Antarctic expedition, and I'm not saying that there's nothing peculiar about it. There's a lot of peculiar things about it, and the difficulty is finding anything out about it. But it had two sponsors within the Nazi hierarchy, and guess who they were?
I would assume Himmler.
No, one of the sponsors was Rudolf Hess.
Right, just as logical as Himmler.
Yeah, and the other sponsor, believe it or not, was Hermann Goering.
Wow.
Now, this is one of the oddest combinations, that there is. It's kind of, it's as strange of a political icon as, Senator Robert Kennedy having at one time worked for Senator Joseph McCarthy in the United States. People just don't understand how strange these alliances are sometimes. But, what's interesting to me is that Rudolf Hess, of course, was one of the Nazi hierarchs that was very interested in the esoteric and occult. And in fact, of all the Nazi leaders, with the exception of Himmler, he was probably the most into all of those things. But then Hermann Goering, of course, had no time for it. He was nothing but a military man, pure and simple. And he was also one of the smarter Nazi leaders. And Hermann Goering's presence here, this is the man that actually founded the Gestapo. This is the man that, founded the Luftwaffe as the modern service branch third service branch of the German military. This is the guy that was Hitler's designated successor after Rudolf Hess flew to England. And, it boggles the mind to think that Hermann Goering would have anything to do with something as non-military as an expedition to Antarctica. Why is this man sponsoring this expedition with Rudolf Hess?
But there's only one conclusion. It has to be something hands-on practical, not just dreams and myths.
Right, exactly. And, to my mind, this means that Goering saw some sort of military potential in Antarctica, but Hess's presence here in this whole thing makes me think that perhaps, again, the Nazis were looking for something. And again, we don't know exactly what they found, because They went back to Germany. There were newsreels taken of their return. Goering had a medal struck to commemorate the expedition. I reproduced that medal in Reich of the Black Sun. And then you don't hear any more about it.
but in other words, they regarded this as a success, whatever it was.
Yeah, they regarded it as a success, whatever it was. But then, there's no details about it. What little details we do know are very, very strange. The Germans captured a bunch of penguins and sea lions and so on and so forth, and brought them back to Germany to figure out how they could make, nutritious meals out of what was available in Antarctica. So in other words, their thinking was they're planning for some sort of permanent presence there, that they wouldn't. And again, it's very telling that they're trying to figure out how to, come up with a balanced diet based on what's available in Antarctica. So that's telling me that they want some sort of permanent presence there. And number two, they know it's going to be difficult to supply.
Yeah.
So it's very, very strange. The whole Antarctic expedition, the Neuschwabenland expedition, is very, very strange. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah, but the fact that it went black,
yes, exactly.
Omission is confirmation.
Right.
First, they are like proud birds about this, and then
right.
Suddenly it goes away.
Suddenly it goes away. There are claims out there on the internet. You occasionally find supposed internet photos of what they found down there. I haven't been able to confirm or deny the veracity of these things. But you're absolutely correct. The fact that they come back, Goering strikes this medal. You have a few minutes of Deutsche Wochenschau showing the newsreel of these guys returning, and then that's it. So whatever happened to all that documentation is probably still buried somewhere, and the full story is still yet to be told.
Okay, so we don't know what they found, but we have an inkling of what they were looking for. At least two hypotheses comes to mind. One is the world ice theory, that they may have found remnants of an antediluvian civilization.
Right.
And the other being obviously the hollow earth theory and some kind of entrance, or at least like Bird claim that there were zones of hot zones where you could actually survive. Now, if we entertain these hypotheses, that's an intention of the trip, and then they find something that has technological or practical impact. There can be any number of scenarios here, but if they look at this as a success, I think I smell a theme that you touched upon in another series of books concerning the old ancient times.
Well, I'm not a subscriber to hollow earth theories or any of that. I don't, there's all of that wild stuff about Admiral Byrd, but I do. It is said that the Nazi expedition did find, as you indicate, warm springs, hot springs, and so on at various points around Antarctica, which is very interesting. And there's a bit of evidence suggesting something like that is going on down there that has been kept out of the public eye. So that's interesting. But the other thing I think you've touched on is not so much the world ice theory. I don't think that Hermann Goering, would have had any real interest in that idea. But you do have the idea percolating in some places at the time that Atlantis may have been, the story is that it sank underneath water. Well, Antarctica, if you look at it in a certain sense, it's a whole continent that quite literally is submerged under a bunch of water, in this case, a bunch of ice. So, there's that suggestion. And I think perhaps maybe it's possible that they found some sort of evidence to confirm that theory. We simply don't know. I strongly suspect, since we're on the subject, I have suspected for years that Hess being a part of this and being one of the co-sponsors of this expedition, that Hess would have known whatever it was that they found down there, which makes his subsequent flight to Great Britain in May of 1941 highly suspicious, because there's no real reason why the British should have kept him, all that time locked up in Spandau prison in Berlin. And the unusual thing here with the Hess case is that right towards the end of the Soviet era, and I find this very, very interesting, it was always the Soviet Union that had blocked those wanting, petitioning for Hess's release. But Gorbachev, there are indicators that Gorbachev, towards the end of the Soviet era, actually did an about face on Hess and said, yeah, we'll release him. So he tossed the ball back into Britain's court, and then Britain had to play the tough guy and say, no, we're not releasing Hess. Well, the question is why? I've strongly suspected, contrary to most of the theories out there, that Hess knew something about Antarctica, that he may have informed the British of some of it, and that the British kept this a secret by keeping him in prison and then possibly subsequently murdering him. The idea of an 89 or 90-year-old, I forget how old he was when he supposedly committed suicide.
He was over 90, I remember.
I think you're right. I think he was over 90. The idea of this frail little old man doing whatever it was that he was required to do, climbing up on tables and rigging a noose and hanging himself, is rather difficult.
There are forensic experts who said that many of them believe it was a murder because he broke his throat bone or something that is not consistent with hanging, but is consistent with strangling. And like you say, he was on British watch when it happened.
Right.
This connecting it to what happened right before, is classical Joseph analytics. I've never connected those two scenarios before. My next question was about Hess. Okay, never mind his post-war fate. That ought to be covered in a separate program dealing with that part of this timeline. But what's the real story behind Hess' strange flight to England at the time of the Operation Barbarossa, which, for those who don't know, it was the invasion of Soviet?
Well, yeah, this is what bothers me, Alf, is that the people looking at the Hess murder, and I do think it was a murder, people looking at the Hess murder have pointed out, there was a British physician by the last name of Murphy, I think his first name was William, wrote a book called The Murder of Rudolf Hess. And in the book, he was one of Hess's attending physicians. And Hess had a war wound from World War I in his, I think it was the right side, I forget which side it was, right or left, but I think it was the right side, had a war wound from World War I where he had been shot. And of course, the Germans noted this wound, medical leave and so on. And the guy in Spandau that Murphy examined showed no sign of having a war wound. So he came up with the idea that they substituted a double for Rudolf Hess that was so good that it managed to fool Frau Hess and his son Rudiger.
Wow.
But that's his theory. And then he goes on, like many people do with the Hess matter, and say, well, Hess had been given the entire order of battle of Operation Barbarossa and the basic operational plan by Hitler himself to take to the British and try to negotiate one last time a withdrawal of Britain from the war. And as proof of his bona fides, gave Hess the order of battle to give to the British. Now, I simply don't, I cannot wrap my head around Adolf Hitler or anybody else in the Nazi hierarchy giving to the British the entire order of battle, for an invasion of the Soviet Union from the Arctic Circle to the Black Sea. My mind just doesn't wrap I can't wrap my mind around that. To me, this is ludicrous.
Yeah, but can you wrap your mind around the fact how primitive the whole operation was? He crash landed and was arrested by constables, and Churchill wouldn't talk with him.
Yeah, exactly.
That doesn't sound like a professional diplomatic mission to me.
No, exactly. If that had been the case, Hitler would have had Hess fly to Sweden, made preliminary contact with somebody, and exactly. So Hess did something here that is completely a mystery. But I do think that the real reason, let's forget about sharing Operation Barbarossa with the British. I think Hess brought with him something entirely different. And that it may have had, and I've thought this for many years, Alvin, it may have had something to do with what the Nazi Antarctic expedition may have found. In other words, he may have brought with him enough information to tantalize the British in thinking that there's something down there, perhaps technological, perhaps it was something he offered to share. And the British, covered the whole thing up, packed him away in Spandau, and that's the end of the story. So there's something going on in Antarctica that's a big, huge secret. This is why we still haven't heard to this day very many details about that Nazi expedition, other than, kooky theories about UFO secret flying saucer research bases and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and we're going to have in the future an entire program on Antarctica, because this is such a big mystery, and we've had inputs now from both you and Levenda, so that's great.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so it is a very interesting tidbit Joseph delivered here, that Hess was one of the people in charge of the Antarctic expedition. They did find something, most likely. At least we have the grounds to substantiate such a speculation.
Right.
And then timing is everything. I mean, in another program, I'm going to ask you about 1947. Roswell, CIA, and Operation High Jump.
Yeah.
3 interesting things in 47. But in
4, actually.
What's the 4?
The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Still to this day, not only is all these things classified, but you're hard-pressed to actually get to one of the poles. There's a lot of military bases stopping you,
Yep.
and no one is passing the poles. They classify all pictures of the poles. The few that are out there seems to suggest a hollow Earth situation or something. That even in Google Maps they censor Arctic.
Yes.
And Antarctic.
Yeah.
And so this just keeps fueling any speculation we can have about the poles.
Right.
And then there's the UFO aspect to everything. How many reports don't we have about UFO activities in these waters? So something is going on, to be sure.
Something is definitely going on. To me, it's very suspicious that you have all of the activity in Antarctica that has been. Occasionally it'll surface in the news and then it'll drop right off the radar.
Yeah.
You have the Lake Vostok business with the Russians there. You have these very, very strange claims about the Nazis. You have you just have so much weird things going on.
I remember once in Coast, Hoagland made a big story about something they found, but that went totally black. And it was never followed up on.
Well, there were people coming out, being brought out of Antarctica during that period that had become suddenly and grievously ill. that had to be flown out from Antarctica to New Zealand in the dead of winter. And we don't know what happened to them. They were taken to New Zealand, and then again the story stops. I find it very interesting because in Roswell and the Reich, at the very end of the book, I put in that book some seismology charts that were taken of readings in Antarctica. And I don't know how true they are. There's no way to document where this or how this guy, he is in Germany, got a hold of these seismic charts. But I thought they were so unusual I had to include them because what they show are just extraordinarily wild long wave activity in Antarctica. And to compare what you see, I actually put a seismograph in there of a nuclear explosion, which is this little wiggle, on the line. But you look at what's going on with the Antarctic, these alleged Antarctic seismographs, and the lines are all over the chart. These are just huge, extraordinarily large, long waves that are going on at various times down there. And I thought, well, okay, there is obviously something going on down there, and this may or may not be further collaboration. If it's genuine, then clearly somebody is doing something to cause all these long waves, because they are not normal. They're just not normal geophysical processes at all. So, 6 of one, half dozen of the other here.
Do you have any information you can share with us about the poles or about Antarctica?
Antarctica is interesting. Of course, many people who study this topic who believe that there's, let's say, a base on Antarctica, will talk about Operation High Jump. And this is something that took place at the end of 1946 and early 1947.
Yeah, we've had 2 others on who have elaborated on High Jump. So,
well, I just want to point out, though, because I'm not a big supporter of the idea that High Jump ran into a Nazi or ET presence there. I don't completely discount it, but I'm not a supporter. And the reason that I say this is that in the immediate aftermath of High Jump, in the next year, in fact, and in the year following that, 1948 and 49, there were subsequent U.S. expeditions to that exact area that did not result in anyone's death, that were successful. And in other words, that region, it's not like it's been off limits ever since. In fact, it was visited a year later. So if the expedition by Admiral Richard Byrd ran into Nazis with advanced weaponry who warned him away, it didn't really stop Americans from arriving there just a year later and then to continue to explore the area. So
they even blew an atom bomb over that area. Officially, it was tests.
Oh, what year was that? Late 40s?
Joseph writes about this in one of his first books. I think
there were very few
before the 50s, I think.
I have never heard about. Well, I should ask him, because
do that.
To my knowledge, there from 1945 to 1998, there are officially, I think there were approximately 2,050 nuclear detonations, mostly by the United States and the Soviet Union and other nations of Britain, France, and the other nuclear nations, all did above ground and below ground nuclear testing. And all of these are documented, and I am not aware of any of them being documented over Antarctica. So I would like to...
Okay. I'll provide you the info when we're done here in private, and you can take it from there.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, but is there a case to connect Antarctica to UFOs somehow?
Well, there's the statement that was from, I believe it was a Chilean newspaper in the immediate aftermath of High Jump's failure, which High Jump, did end early. And there were deaths connected with the program. And, depending on what you read, the deaths were caused by different things. It was an enormous expedition, too. It had, I think, 5,000 people in there. It was huge. And it just didn't go well, and it ended several months early. And there was a statement in a Chilean newspaper in the immediate aftermath. And I'm simply paraphrasing roughly here, but Richard Byrd apparently said to this journalist, there are powers at the poles. There are powers that can traverse pole to pole, I think is what he said.
Yeah, the future enemy. We must.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the question is, well, what exactly did he mean? And there was never a follow-up that he made publicly to that statement. So
because he got classified immediately at his return.
Well, maybe, yeah. I mean, it is true. There's some things that are very suspicious about it, and it's also true. Obviously, we know this that the Nazis had a significant interest in the southern hemisphere, South America. And they did have an interest in Antarctica. Neue Schwabenland was the area they claimed it. Now, I don't know of any evidence that they did anything more than just drop some flags down there in the 1930s. But they were interested in it. They were absolutely, after the war, many of them did flock to South America. We all know this.
Yeah.
That's a matter of historical record. And
with 20 billion at their books and exotic technology,
gold, art, and absolutely a lot of money and a lot of power. So they went to South America, they went to the United States, they went to a variety of places and maintained an important locus of power. So this is something that really, it's thank goodness we have researchers like Joseph Farrell and also my very good friend and colleague Peter Levenda. Yeah. Who do very good work on the survival of the Nazi power structure in South America primarily. And, whether it had something in Antarctica, I'm not convinced of that personally.
But I must tell you, the Byrd expedition papers are still classified to this day, just so you know.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
I agree. It's really, really, I mean, wouldn't we love to be people to get access to those papers and read them?
And thank you for reminding us that people actually died at that expedition and there was material losses, because I think we forgot to point that out when we talked with Levenda and Farrell about this. I don't think we...
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm glad you had Peter on the show as well. I'm glad.
Yeah, we're going to have him back. But it's important to know then that there was losses actually connected to this. But do you know anything about the Linda Moulton Howe information that Levenda mentioned, that there were American scientists and pilots who reported that they had seen some kind of UFO, and they were dispersed all over the world afterwards, not to talk.
Well, I know Linda quite well. I don't know the specific connection here. Now, I will say, though, that Antarctica does have a number of UFO reports. I'm not talking about 1947, but in the 1960s, 1965, there were some very interesting reports from July of 1965. And I believe there were a few other instances of unusual aerial activity that has been reported over Antarctica. So I think there's activity there, or possible activity there. I'm not sure about the case you're referring to here with Linda Moulton Howe. Sorry.
Okay. But no, I mean, when we have such a walking lexica of UFO cases here, I have to ask, because we've had an interest in Antarctica in all our shows. So.
Oh, no, it is fascinating. And I mean, it's such a huge place. And, it seems forbidding to us, but if you've got good technology, you're able to make a secure base there. Hey, it's maybe not a bad place.
Wouldn't it be a good place for the Breakaway Civilization if they're physically breaked away?
Underground.
Yeah?
Look, yeah, actually it would be. If you have access to your own source of energy, what's to stop you from going underground and building a very secure environment there?
And scientists say that in Antarctica, they are pretty sure there's huge caverns and natural pockets of underground structures.
Exactly. You don't even have to hollow it out.
No.
We have the technology to build bases under the ocean floors.
Wow.
That technology, I believe, has existed since the 1960s. Richard Sauter writes about this quite a bit, and I think he's right on. So what we don't have is the proof that they exist, but we do have, the plans that were underway in the 1960s to create what were called DUMBs, deep underground military bases, deep,
Right.
deep, and that includes under the ocean floor. And all you really need to have a base under the ocean floor is two things: you need energy and you need oxygen. You need air. And if you're able to extract oxygen out of the water, which we've had that technology since the 50s, and you have a source of energy, maybe it would be a useful thing to have.
Yeah, I mean, if you can have bases on other planets, at least you can have a base under the...
And this goes for Antarctica. So certainly the possibility, I think we have to acknowledge that there's a possibility there. Now we have to look for the evidence.
You've been listening to excerpts from our conversations with Peter Levenda, called Rise of the Nazi Cult, with Joseph Farrell, called Secrets of the Third Reich, and with Richard Dolan, called The Case for a Breakaway Civilization. If you enjoyed this, remember to check out the original forums where they partake, and do drop by our future programs where we'll have all of them back, as well as similar guests of high integrity and research quality. Before closing, let me give heartfelt gratitudes to 3 different female listeners who donated recently and helped reduce our costs in purchasing new sound equipment in order to increase your listening experience. Until next time, together with the forum team, I sincerely remain your host, Al. Be seeing you.
Who is number one?